Hello, I'm Sebastian. Welcome to 9 Trees podcast. Today I will summarize and review the book, Land, How the Hunger for Ownership Shaped the Modern World by Simon Winchester is a wide-ranging narrative about one of humanity's most persistent obsessions, possessing the ground beneath our feet. Blending history, geology, economics, politics, and cultural anthropology, Winchester traces how ideas of territory and property evolved from ancient boundaries and sacred landscapes into modern systems of deeds, surveys, and state-backed titles. The book treats land not simply as scenery or real estate, but as a driver of power, identity, and conflict, shaping empires, fueling migrations, and underpinning wealth. Along the way, it connects big historical pivots to practical tools like mapping, measurement, and law, showing how the concept of ownership became enforceable and how that enforceability reshaped societies. Winchester's approach is global and comparative, moving across continents and centuries to explain why land remains central to both private dreams and public disputes, especially in a world strained by inequality and environmental limits. I will give you key takeaways from this book. Firstly, from shared ground to enforceable property, a central theme is the long transition from land as a communal, spiritual, or customary resource to land as a commodity with legally protected ownership. Winchester explores how early societies often relied on tradition and local consensus to manage fields, forests, and grazing areas, and how those arrangements could be stable until population pressure, trade, or conquest increased the stakes. The story then shifts to the rise of formal property regimes, written law, transferable titles, and institutions that could adjudicate disputes and enforce decisions. This transformation matters because it changes what land is for. Under customary use, land is tied to belonging and survival. Under ownership, land becomes collateral, inheritance, and a tool for extracting rents. The book highlights how this shift can create prosperity by encouraging investment and long-term planning, yet also produce dispossession when customary claims are ignored or overridden. By treating ownership as an invention that spread unevenly, Winchester frames modern real estate markets, landlordism, and even national borders as outcomes of historical choices, not natural inevitabilities. Secondly, measurement, maps, and the technologies of control, Winchester emphasizes that ownership depends on knowing precisely what is owned. The ability to measure, describe, and record parcels of land turns abstract claims into enforceable rights. Surveys, cadastral maps, boundary markers, and standardized units of measurement become the quiet infrastructure behind markets and states. The book shows how mapping is never purely technical. It is political because it determines whose claims are legible to courts and bureaucracies. When land is mapped and registered, it can be taxed, mortgaged, and sold. It can also be seized more efficiently. Winchester connects these tools to state formation, explaining how governments expanded authority by creating systems that made land visible in ledgers and on paper. He also highlights the human consequences of this administrative clarity, including disputes triggered by new boundaries that cut across older, lived geographies. By focusing on the instruments of land control, the narrative helps readers see why conflicts often erupt where measurement meets memory, and why development projects and land reforms regularly hinge on who controls the map, the registry, and the definitions of legitimate title. Thirdly, empire, settlement, and the making of modern borders. Another major topic is how land hunger propelled exploration, conquest, and settlement, and how these processes hardened into the borders and property systems people now take for granted. Winchester links territorial acquisition to imperial ambition, showing how land grants, plantations, and frontier policies were used to reward loyalty, attract settlers, and extract resources. The book also examines the legal and rhetorical frameworks empires used to justify taking land, including doctrines that treated inhabited territories as available if they were not used in ways colonizers recognized as ownership. These choices had durable effects: indigenous displacement, unequal land distribution, and layered legal regimes where different groups faced different rules for proving title. Winchester's global lens underscores that borders are often the frozen outcomes of messy historical encounters, not clean geographic facts. By tracing how claims were asserted, surveyed, and defended, the book clarifies why border conflicts and land claims remain so emotionally charged. Land becomes a container for identity and memory, which is why disputes about territory can persist across generations even after the original economic motivations fade. Fourthly, land as wealth, inequality, speculation, and social stability, Winchester treats land as a foundational store of wealth and a key engine of inequality. Because land is finite, its value rises with population growth, urbanization, and infrastructure, rewarding those who already own it. The book connects this dynamic to the emergence of landlord classes, rent-seeking, and speculative booms, explaining how land markets can amplify disparities even in otherwise productive economies. It also explores how governments attempt to manage these tensions through taxation, zoning, redistribution, and land reform, and why such efforts so often meet political resistance. Land is unique because it anchors both personal security and national revenue, making it a target for policy and a flashpoint for social unrest. Winchester shows that when access to land is blocked, people may be pushed into precarious labor, informal settlements, or migration, while those with titles can borrow, invest, and accumulate. Readers come away with a clearer understanding of why housing affordability crises, rural poverty, and debates over inheritance are not isolated issues, but expressions of a deeper structure: who controls land, under what rules, and for whose benefit. Lastly, environmental limits and the future of ownership. The book also presses the question of whether traditional notions of ownership can survive accelerating environmental stress. Land is not only a legal asset, but an ecological system with constraints, and Winchester draws attention to how soil, water, climate, and biodiversity shape what land can sustain. As sea levels rise, deserts expand, and extreme weather intensifies, the boundaries on paper may no longer match realities on the ground. This creates new dilemmas. What happens to property when coastlines move, when farmland becomes unproductive, or when fire risk makes regions hard to insure? Winchester connects these pressures to modern governance and global interdependence, since land decisions affect food security, migration, and political stability. The narrative encourages readers to think beyond ownership as absolute control and towards stewardship, resilience, and shared responsibility. Without presenting easy fixes, the book argues that the future of land will depend on balancing private rights with public needs, including conservation, equitable access, and adaptation. This topic ties the historical sweep to contemporary urgency, showing that land remains central to how societies will cope with the coming century. In conclusion, this book suits readers who enjoy big history with real-world relevance. Anyone interested in geopolitics, economics, law, environmental change, or the hidden mechanics behind everyday things like home ownership and national borders. It is especially valuable for people who sense that arguments about housing, inequality, migration, and climate are connected but want a coherent framework for understanding why. By tracing how ownership systems emerged, how they were enforced through maps and institutions, and how they reshaped wealth and power, the book can sharpen a reader's ability to interpret current events. You start seeing land policy as a lever that influences opportunity, stability, and conflict, not as a dry technical matter. Compared with similar books that focus narrowly on real estate, a single country, or a single era, Winchester offers a more global, interdisciplinary story that links deep history to present pressures. That breadth makes it a strong purchase for readers who want one accessible narrative that connects property rights, empire, markets, and environmental limits. It gives context that can inform personal decisions and civic opinions alike. If you would like to support Simon Winchester, you can buy the book through the Amazon link I've provided in the podcast description. After reading the book, please let me know what you think and share your thoughts. See you around.